The call came on a Thursday afternoon in September 2023, and the first thing my wife said, not hello, not are you sitting down, not even a courtesy pause, was, I just inherited millions. Pack your things. Get out of my house. 26 years of marriage. That's how she chose to open. My name is Tom Wood. I'm 55 years old. I own and operate Wood Precision Components, a contract machining and fabrication shop in the Garfield Industrial Park area of Akron, Ohio. We make parts for the medical device and automotive sectors. Tight tolerances, demanding clients, zero margin for error. I started the business in 1996 with a used CNC lathe, $14,000, and the reasonable belief that if you built things correctly and treated people honestly, the math would eventually work out. For the most part, it did. The marriage had been another calculation entirely, and by the time Gail's voice came through my phone with those words, I had already spent 2 weeks quietly running the numbers. Let me explain that. Gail Wood, 53 years old, and I had been married since August 1997. We had one daughter, Cassie, who was 24 in September 2023 and living in Columbus. Gail worked part-time in marketing coordination for a nonprofit in downtown Akron. She had a dry sense of humor, a gift for throwing dinner parties, and, as I had been slowly and reluctantly coming to understand over the previous 18 months, a romantic relationship with a man named Derek Colby that had apparently been running since late 2021. I hadn't confronted her. I had documented instead. 11 years of running a precision shop teaches you that when something is wrong, you don't smash the part. You measure the deviation, trace the source, and fix it correctly. I had been measuring. Gail's uncle, Walter Harmon, was 79 years old and had spent his working life as a commercial real estate developer in the greater Cleveland area. He was a deliberate, quiet man who had accumulated a significant estate over 50 years of disciplined work and had no children of his own. He was fond of Gail. He was also, and this is the part that mattered, surprisingly fond of me. Walter had called me on a Monday 3 weeks before Gail's call. He was in the hospital at that point, a cardiac issue that his doctors had been managing since spring. His voice was careful, measured. Tom, I want you to know that my attorney finalized the estate documents last week. Gail is the primary beneficiary of the liquid assets, but there are protections built in. Provisions I put in place specifically because I've watched my niece for 53 years and I know how she moves when she has leverage. A pause. The protections are for you. Gail doesn't know they exist. When the inheritance clears, she's going to make a move. Be ready. And Tom, document everything from this moment forward. I asked what I should be documenting. Walter coughed once, dry and short. Everything. He passed away 8 days later on September 4th, 2023. The estate cleared probate on September 14th. Gail received the call from Walter's attorney that morning. She called me at 2:20 p.m. I was standing at my production floor reviewing a set of first article inspection reports. When the phone rang, my shop foreman, a man named Dale Briggs, was at the desk across from me, going over tolerances on a new automotive component run. I stepped outside the floor door into the corridor, answered the call, and heard those words. Pack your things. Get out of my house. My house. The house in question was a 4-bedroom colonial on Ridgemont Drive in the Fairlawn neighborhood of Akron, purchased in 2003 jointly, mortgage paid off in 2019. Appraised at $480,000 in the spring of 2023. Both names on the deed. Both names on every document. 20 years of mortgage payments, most of them made from the shop's revenue. I listened to the rest of the call. It lasted 4 minutes. Gail told me she would be home at 6 p.m., that she expected the house to be clear of my belongings by then, and that her attorney had already prepared divorce paperwork. I told her I'd be there. Then I went back inside, finished reviewing the inspection reports with Dale, and drove to my attorney's office. His name is Roger Castillo. He has handled my business legal work since 2004. Contracts, liability, the occasional employment matter. He is 58 years old, methodical and constitutionally incapable of panic, which is one of the most useful qualities a person can have. I was in his office on South Main Street in downtown Akron by 4 p.m. I laid out everything, the marriage, the 18 months of documentation I had accumulated regarding Gail and Derek Colby, Walter's phone call, And the call from 2 hours ago. Roger listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Roger folded his hands on the desk. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, not community property. The court divides marital assets fairly, which doesn't mean equally, but it does mean that 26 years of contribution to the household and business revenue will be considered. The house is marital property regardless of what she may think about it. A pause. What do you know about these protections Walter mentioned? Nothing specific yet. His attorney is a man named Gerald Tate, out of Shaker Heights. Call him tomorrow. Today, go home. Be civil if she's produced divorce paperwork. Photograph everything before you touch it. Don't sign anything tonight. She'll expect me gone. Let her expect it. You have equal legal right to be in that house. The only thing that can change that is a court order, and she doesn't have one. He looked at me. Tom, don't sign anything tonight. I drove to Ridgemont Drive. Gail was home when I arrived at 5:40 p.m. She was wearing a blazer I hadn't seen before and had the expression of a woman who had been rehearsing this scene and was slightly annoyed that I was early. A folder sat on the dining room table. Papers arranged in a clean stack. A pen placed beside them with the deliberateness of a prop. You're here. A flat statement. You told me to come home. She gestured at the table. Divorce petition and property separation agreement. My attorney drafted them this afternoon. Sign and go. I picked up the folder. Flipped through the pages slowly. The documents were formatted correctly, but carried no court case number, no filing stamp, no notarization on the signature lines. Prepared that afternoon, she had said, meaning filed with no court, meaning legally at this moment they were paper. I set the folder down, picked up my phone, photographed every page front and back. What are you doing? Documenting. She made a sound that sat somewhere between frustration and contempt. I set the phone in my pocket, picked up the pen, and signed where indicated. All 3 copies. She watched me with the look of someone who had expected resistance and was recalibrating to find none. I set the pen down, looked at her. Good luck, Gail. She blinked. That's it? That's it. I went to the bedroom. Packed a bag, clothes, medications, laptop, the external drive I kept in my nightstand, and the accordion folder I had been maintaining for 18 months with every document printout and screenshot I had accumulated. I had been ready for this bag since Walter called me. Gail did not know about the accordion folder. She had no reason to. I came back through the living room. She was on her phone, speaking quietly, not bothering to face away from me. I caught the words, "He's leaving now," and exactly as planned. I stopped at the door, turned back. She looked at me with the settled confidence of a woman who believed the board had just cleared in her favor. Good luck. Again. And I meant it. Because she was going to need it. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I checked into an extended stay hotel on West Market Street in Fairlawn, the kind of place that rents by the week, has a kitchenette, and asks nothing beyond a valid credit card. I had booked it after the call. Walter had told me to be ready. I had been ready. That evening I called Cassie. She was 24, living in Columbus, working in healthcare administration. She already knew something was wrong. Gail had apparently called her earlier in the day. Cassie's version of events, delivered in the flat tone she uses when she is controlling something large, was that her mother had called to announce the inheritance and mentioned, almost as an aside, that she and Tom were going their separate ways. Going their separate ways, the phrase of someone who has already written the narrative and distributed it. Dad, Cassie's voice. What actually happened? I told her. All of it, including the parts I had kept from her during the 18 months of documentation. Derek Colby. The pattern of withdrawal from our joint accounts I had noticed 6 months ago and began tracking. Walter's call. I told her because she was 24, not 14, and she deserved the accurate version. She was quiet for a moment. Cassie was quiet for a moment. Then, careful. The accounts. How much? I don't have a full figure yet. I started the detailed audit tonight. Okay, Dad. Whatever you need. I spent the next 3 hours at the kitchenette table with my laptop in the accordion folder. The joint account audit was methodical work, the kind I was built for. 12 years of statements, cross-referenced against household expenses I could verify and transfers I could not. The unverifiable transfers had been running for 4 years, not 6 months. I had caught the tail end of them in my preliminary review. The full scope was considerably larger. The transfers went to an account in the name of Patricia Harmon, Gail's mother, 77, who lived in a retirement community in Mentor, Ohio. The amounts varied from $600 to $4,200, with no discernible pattern to the timing, except that they consistently fell in the week after I had made a large business-related deposit to the joint account. Total transfers, $178,400 over 4 years. I created a spreadsheet, documented every transaction with date, amount, and source deposit, exported it as a PDF, sent it to Roger Castillo at 11:47 p.m. with a cover note. Then, I opened my email and found what I had been looking for since Walter's call. 3 days before he passed, Walter had emailed me directly. Not Gail, me. Subject line, "For your records, WRH Estate." The email contained a single attachment, a PDF of a letter from his estate attorney, Gerald Ford, summarizing 2 provisions Walter had added to his will in August 2023. The first provision, a clause specifying that in the event of divorce proceedings initiated within 24 months of Gail receiving the inheritance, 50% of the liquid inheritance, which at distribution was $1.4 million, making her share $700,000 after taxes, would be placed in a restricted trust for a minimum of 5 years, accessible only for qualified living expenses, not for property acquisition, investment, or transfer to third parties. This was a legitimate estate mechanism under Ohio law, designed and executed by Walter's attorney of record. It was not contestable. It had been in the will since August. The second provision, a direct bequest to Tom Wood of $85,000, described in the will as recognition of his contribution to the stability and well-being of the Harmon family over the course of his marriage. This bequest was independent of any divorce proceedings and would be distributed regardless of the marital outcome. Walter had not told Gail about either provision. He had told me. Document everything, he had said. Be ready. He had known exactly what his niece was going to do the moment she had money and an exit. He had spent his last lucid weeks building a wall around the thing she thought she was running toward. I sat in that kitchenette at midnight and thought about Walter Harmon, a man I had known for 26 years, who had attended my daughter's birthday parties and eaten at my table and never said a single unnecessary word, and felt something I can only describe as the particular gratitude of being understood by someone who didn't make a production of it. I had no idea, when I walked out of that house earlier that evening, what was coming for Gail. But sitting there at that table, I understood for the first time the full shape of what Walter had built, and I understood that my job now was simply to let it land. Roger Castillo called Gerald Ford the following morning, Friday, September 15th, 2023. Gerald confirmed everything. The will had been filed with the Cuyahoga County Probate Court. Both provisions were active and uncontestable. The restricted trust provision had been triggered the moment Gail initiated divorce proceedings, which her unsigned, unfiled paperwork from the previous evening had not technically done, but which her own phone call and subsequent actions had documented as her clear intent. Roger filed our formal response in Summit County on Monday, September 18, 2023. The filing documented the marital asset basis of the Ridgemont Drive property. The joint account transfers totaling $178,400 to Patricia Harmon's account over 4 years, and notified Gail's attorney of the estate provisions. Gail's attorney, a family law practice in Akron whose name I'll decline to include, received those filings and called Roger the same afternoon. Their first position, the transfers to Patricia Harmon were legitimate gifts to an elderly relative with living expenses. Roger's response, gifts from a joint marital account require both parties' knowledge and consent. Under Ohio law, Tom Wood had neither known about nor consented to any of these transfers. This was marital waste, the legal term for one spouse depleting joint assets without authorization. He attached the spreadsheet. Their second position, the will provisions were designed to punish Gail for exercising her right to divorce. Roger's response, Walter Harmon had the legal right to attach any conditions he chose to his estate bequest. The restricted trust was structured under Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 5808 governing spendthrift trusts, a legitimate and routinely used estate mechanism. It was not punitive. It was a condition of inheritance that Gail had accepted by signing the estate distribution documents. By Wednesday, September 20th, 2023, Gail's attorney stopped arguing and started asking what a settlement looked like. Let me tell you something about equitable distribution law in Ohio, because this is the part of the story that people tend to gloss over, and it is actually the most important part. Ohio is not a 50-50 state. Ohio courts distribute marital assets equitably, meaning fairly, based on the totality of the circumstances. Factors include the duration of the marriage, the economic contributions of each spouse, and the financial conduct of the parties. When one spouse has spent 4 years systematically withdrawing marital funds to a third-party account without the other spouse's knowledge, that conduct is categorized as marital waste and is factored into the distribution, often by crediting the other spouse for the wasted amount. This matters because Gail walked into these proceedings believing she held every card. She had the inheritance, or thought she did. She had a head start, she believed. What she actually had was a restricted trust that locked half her inheritance for 5 years, a $178,400 marital waste claim working against her share of joint assets, a $480,000 marital property home that she had no more right to than I did, and a husband who had spent 18 months documenting every deviation before the first confrontation. She had played precision work with someone who had spent his entire career doing nothing but. The settlement negotiations ran through October and into November 2023. I will not catalog every session because the details are mostly interchangeable with the tedium that characterizes any formal dissolution of a life. What I will tell you is the outcome, because the outcome is the thing that earned the good luck I meant twice on my way out the door. The Ridgemont Drive property was listed for sale jointly in November 2023. It sold in January 2024 for $497,000. Above the spring appraisal because the Fairlawn market had moved. After closing costs and the remaining tax prorations, the net proceeds were split 60/40 in my favor, with the 20-point differential representing a partial credit against the $178,400 in documented marital waste. The balance of the waste credit was applied against Gail's share of the joint investment accounts. I received $298,200 from the property sale, plus $112,000 direct bequest from Walter Harmon's estate, which had been distributed by Gerald Ford in October 2023, independent of the divorce proceedings as Walter had intended. Total, $495,200. Gail received her share of the property sale net, reduced by the waste credit. The restricted trust, $350,000, locked for 5 years under conditions that prohibited property acquisition and transfer to third parties. The unrestricted half of her inheritance, $350,000, which was hers to do with as she chose. Derek Colby, the man she had apparently been planning her next chapter with, had reportedly expected the inheritance to be accessible and liquid. By November 2023, when the trust restriction had become public knowledge through the probate filing, his enthusiasm for the next chapter had notably diminished. I heard this from Cassie, who heard it from a mutual acquaintance. I did not feel satisfaction about it. I felt very little about Derek Colby at all. He was a supporting character in a story that was never really about him. The divorce was finalized on February 3, 2024. I was 55 years old and single for the first time since 1997. In March 2024, I made 2 decisions. The first was to hire a business development manager for Wood Precision Components, a woman named Sharon Briggs, 42, who had 20 years of manufacturing sales experience and had been on my radar for a while. With the financial stability the settlement had given me and the bandwidth freed up by not managing a deteriorating marriage, I was ready to grow the business in a direction I had been postponing. Sharon came on board in April. By August, we had signed 2 new medical device contracts that increased annual revenue by 31%. The second decision was to move. Not out of state. I had a business, a daughter in Columbus, roots in the region. but I sold the extended stay hotel lease and bought a 2-bedroom condominium in the Highland Square neighborhood of Akron, about 2 miles from the old house. Modern building, high ceilings, a view of the Portage Path Greenway. I paid cash. No mortgage, no joint accounts, nothing with anyone else's name on it. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room and looked at the view and tried to identify what I was feeling. It took a minute to name it correctly. Quiet. Just quiet. No background noise of waiting for something to go wrong. I had lived with that background noise for longer than I had realized. Cassie came up from Columbus in April 2024 for what she called a housewarming, and I called her making sure I had bought a couch. She walked through the condo with the appraising eye of a woman who has her mother's organizational intelligence and her father's practical priorities, and declared it acceptable, which from Cassie is a strong endorsement. We sat at the kitchen island with coffee, and she asked me, in the direct way she asks things, whether I was okay. Yes. Actually, yes. That's different from the last 2 years. The last 2 years I was managing something I didn't fully understand yet. Now I understand it, and it's over. She turned her mug in her hands. She called me last week. What did she want? She wanted me to tell you that she never meant for it to go the way it did, that she thought you'd just accept it and move on. A pause. I told her that wasn't my message to deliver. I nodded. Thank you. I'm not choosing sides, Dad. I love my mother. But what she did was wrong. The accounts, the way she made that call. Cassie stopped. She treated you like an inconvenience to be cleared. You're not an inconvenience. There are moments in a person's life that don't announce themselves as significant, but turn out to be. That sentence, from my 24-year-old daughter, sitting at my kitchen island on a Saturday morning in April, landed somewhere permanent. You're not an inconvenience either. Whatever happens between your mother and me, you never were. She reached across the counter and briefly gripped my forearm, the way she has since she was about 7 years old. And I understood that this was her version of everything being said that needed to be said. There is something worth saying directly here, because this story has an educational truth in it beyond the legal mechanics. A lot of people in my position would have spiraled. The late-night discovery of 4 years of hidden withdrawals, the premeditated nature of the call, the staged paperwork on the dining room table. These are the kinds of things designed to destabilize a person, to make them react emotionally, sign things they shouldn't, say things they can't take back, make decisions that hand leverage to the other side. Gail had planned a version of events where I was the variable she had already solved for, the obedient, stunned husband who walks out, signs whatever is put in front of him, and realizes too late what he had. What she had not solved for was 26 years of watching a precision machining business operate on the principle that you measure before you cut, you document before you confront, and you never assume the tolerance is fine just because it looks fine from a distance. Walter Harmon had understood that about me. He had built his protections not around what Gail would do, but around what Tom Wood would do when given enough time and clear information. He had trusted me to not panic. He had trusted me to document everything. I was not going to let him be wrong about that. As of August 2024, as I finish writing this account, here is where things stand. Wood Precision Components has its best revenue year on record. Sharon Briggs closed the second medical device contract in July and has a third prospect in late-stage negotiation. Dale Briggs, my foreman, no relation to Sharon, a coincidence that amuses both of them, has been with me since 2007 and received the largest performance bonus I have ever paid this past December. I live in Highland Square. I walk to the Greenway in the mornings before work. I have exactly as much noise in my life as I choose to introduce. That turns out to be less than I thought I needed and more than enough. Cassie visited twice this summer. We hiked the Cuyahoga Valley National Park trail system on her second visit, which neither of us had done despite living 40 minutes from it for the better part of our lives. She is applying for a senior position at her hospital network. She will get it. She approaches things with the same deliberate patience I apparently passed on in ways I wasn't tracking. Gail is in the house she rented in West Akron. The restricted trust remains locked. Derek Colby is, from what I understand, no longer in the picture. I don't track this information actively. It reaches me through the ordinary channels of a small city where people know each other, and I receive it the way you receive news about a neighborhood you used to live in. with mild interest and no investment. I think about Walter Harmon regularly. I think about the fact that a 79-year-old man in a hospital room, facing the end of his life, spent some of his remaining clarity making sure his niece's husband would not be left without a floor to stand on. He did this not because I was family. I was only family by marriage, and he knew that marriage was ending even if I didn't, but because he had watched me for 26 years and made a judgment about what kind of person I was. I take that seriously, more seriously if I'm honest, than most of what happened in the year that followed. His bequest sits in a separate savings account. I have not spent it. I will eventually, on something I would not otherwise have allowed myself. A piece of equipment for the shop. Maybe. A renovation to the condo. Something real and lasting. He built carefully and quietly over 50 years. He trusted the process and trusted the people in it. I try to do the same. Gail said good luck when I signed those papers. She meant it as a dismissal. What she didn't know, what she had never bothered to find out, in 26 years, was that luck had very little to do with it. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.